So, Paths of Glory. Now, this is one, I didn't actually rewatch it this week here. I did see it a couple years ago, and I've probably seen it at least 3, if not 4 or 5 times. It's short, it's Stanley Kubrick. It's one of my favorite movies. Again, I do like All Quiet on the Western Front, but for some reason, I've just always found Paths of Glory way more rewatchable, and it's just kind of fascinating. Had you seen this one before?
No, but I completely agree. Yeah, this was awesome. I was super happy with it. I think I'll definitely revisit it again in the future. Yeah, I mean, it's Kirk Douglas being directed by Stanley Kubrick. It's awesome.
Right. What's not to love? And it's like less than 90 minutes. So it's a nice short anti-war film. And what I didn't realize, and I kind of done various degrees of research of this over the years, is the extent to which, and again, Kubrick had a penchant for the controversial. And I guess I hadn't necessarily considered this to be one of his more controversial choices. But did you see there where it was basically banned in tons of countries?
Yeah. There's actually, and I guess that was because the movie is based on a novel that was then adapted into a stage play, and the stage play was basically like, it was critically panned and also a commercial flop because nobody wanted to go see an anti-war play, but Kubrick wanted to adapt it anyway because he just thought that the subject matter was so important.
Right. That's where Kubrick's always been one of my favorite directors, because he's just so bold and brave, and he's not afraid to tackle tough subject matter, and almost feels like it's necessary to tackle these tough topics that no one else wants to deal with. So I've always just respected him for that, and I had no real reason to bring up Steven Spielberg on this episode, but I've kind of always seen Spielberg as kind of the antithesis to that Spielberg is a great director, but doesn't necessarily tackle controversy or challenging things. He does tell important stories, but he doesn't tell stories that make people think, why the heck would he make that movie? What was he thinking? Like, that's just not where he goes. And basically, that was Kubrick's whole career, was making movies that made people say just that, or send him death threats, or get his movies banned in different countries across the world for various reasons. I've just always been really, really impressed with his work. So this is based loosely on an actual event, and we are still dealing with World War I. This actually works very well as a companion piece to All Quiet on the Western Front that we just talked about on Tuesday. It's from the French perspective instead of the German, but the focus specifically is the idea of executing soldiers in your own army for cowardice in a way to inspire the rest of the army to not act similarly. But of course, then the travesty of this whole movie and the actual events it's based on is they were accused of cowardice in a situation actually very much like what we saw in Gallipoli, where it was just kind of that lost cause. You had no chance of advancement, and yet you're still being asked to go forward. And basically, like, the moment you stick your head up out of the trench, you're going to die. And then because you refuse to do that, we're going to kill you. Okay, so basically, and I don't need to get specific about the geography, but basically, yes. So we're in the middle of the whole trench warfare thing, and there was a spot where the French had basically just been kind of bogged down, hadn't been able to make any progress. Recent attacks were unable to make any advancement. It's just basically kind of a lost cause, but they're still trying to say this is an important spot we have to get.
Yeah, at the beginning of the movie, there's a little bit of narration that's kind of setting up the story, and it's the only narration in the movie, but there's a kind of, just to kind of paint the picture of what it's like to be living in this time of the trench warfare. It says successful attacks are measured in hundreds of yards and paid for in lives by hundreds of thousands. So basically, the trenches at this point are stretching the entire length of the French border, from the English Channel pretty much all the way down to southeastern France. I don't know what the name of that sea is there, but there's trenches that whole way. And basically for the entire war, they don't really move. They kind of move a little bit here and there, but just to move a few yards, would take thousands and thousands of troops to do. And even if you did get there, you might have to just turn around because you can't hold it.
Right. So just the absolute waste of life. And we've kind of talked about before with World War One. It's just kind of it was that worst nexus of military tactics versus new technology, and they just weren't prepared for a battle or for a war like this. So yeah, again, in the actual event, this was kind of based on before they were getting ready to make one more futile attempt. The French planes were supposed to basically drop a barrage on the German trench before the French advanced. Oh, well, they missed and hit their own trench, and then those people in that trench were then still supposed to go and attack the German line. So basically, the general still orders them to advance and actually has his order basically ignored. And then when they do finally have it go through, basically the men just refuse to leave, and then they want some accountability. So it's actually more people that they tried to accuse of cowardice here in the actual event than the movie. The movie kind of narrowed it down to make it about the actual guys. So it's 24 were sentenced to death. However, 18 basically got that execution order stayed. 2 more were kind of exonerated for not having heard the order. And then 4 men were executed by firing squad. Though basically exonerated not long after. Basically even still during the war, they kind of still had...
Yes, they were exonerated posthumously. So basically
Right.
Everyone, which I'm sure they would have rather been exonerated before they got shot. But that was actually one of the scenes in the movie that I thought was kind of really interesting, showing kind of how out of touch the higher up leadership is when they're haggling over how many guys they think need to be executed.
Oh my gosh, right.
The one guy says, I want, 12 men executed. And then he ends up coming down to, he said, well, we'll just have each one of the company commanders pick one guy. So that'll be 3 that we'll put on trial. And the other guy says, 3. Yeah, that's reasonable.
Right. You're talking about their own men they're going to murder. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so where the movie does a great job, again, it's all fictionalized. It's made up names that they use a made up place called the Anthill that they're trying to take, but I don't think any of that's based on anything specific. So, but they do a great job of adding in all the subtext that, this one guy's picked because he's actually got dirt on his commanding officer.
Oh, the guy that gets the...
I forget, what was it that he had on his commanding officer?
So at the beginning of the movie, it shows these 2 guys, a corporal, this is actually interesting, a Corporal Paris and a Private Lejeune, which, side note, I don't know if Stanley Kubrick did this on purpose. I wasn't able to find, but those are both names of Marine Corps bases on the East Coast. So Paris Island is where half of Marines go to boot camp. Actually, in Full Metal Jacket, when they're at boot camp, it's on Paris Island.
Oh, interesting.
And then the other guy, Private Lejeune, there's a Camp Lejeune, which is named for a Marine general who fought in World War I. So I don't know if that's intentional or not, but I just thought that was kind of interesting. But anyway, so Corporal Paris and Private Lejeune go on this recon mission with their lieutenant, and the lieutenant tells Private Lejeune, hey, we're going to wait here. Go check up ahead. And Corporal Paris says, split up and, at a night mission. Are you crazy? He's like, do what I say. And so the guy leaves and he doesn't come back right away. And the lieutenant freaks out and thinks that they're going to get killed. So he throws a grenade and then runs away. And then Corporal Paris is like, well, I'm not going to just ditch Private Lejeune out here and leave with the lieutenant. I'm going to go try and find him. So he goes up and finds that Private Lejeune was killed by their grenade that their own lieutenant threw. So he comes back and he's upset with the lieutenant, who refuses to admit guilt, threatens him with all this punitive action. And he says, oh, well, I'm now going to threaten you with, revealing that you killed one of your own men, basically out of negligence and, because you freaked out and couldn't keep it together on this recon mission. And so then Corporal Paris is one of the guys that gets picked to be, to go stand trial for cowardice, because his company commander is basically trying to get rid of him because he's got dirt on him that he killed one of his own guys.
Right. And what's almost even more heartbreaking is that his commanding officer isn't vindictive or cruel. He's just weak. He's doing it out of fear, not malice, which somehow makes it worse. Because it's almost even just tough to watch. Because you hate him for it, but again, he's not a jerk about it. He's just a coward about it, which is all ironic because they're being killed for cowardice.
Yes, and this is kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but at the very end, when Colonel Dax, who's played by Kirk Douglas in the movie, who's still alive, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, he's like 100.
Yeah, he's like 102 or something like that.
Right. Oh, yeah. I'm not exaggerating. Let me look it up.
But when he basically kind of like figures out that lieutenant picked Corporal Paris because he wanted to get rid of him, and he knew that there was nothing that he could do really for Corporal Paris because, you know, even though he believes him, nobody else probably would, and there's no other witnesses to the event. But he makes that lieutenant in charge of the firing squad to kill those guys. Basically like, hey man, you know, you're going to get what you wanted, but you're also going to have to get a front row seat to it. You're not just going to get to, you know, get this guy out of the way and then go about your life.
Right.
You're going to carry out this sentence.
Yeah, Kirk Douglas in this film is actually just one of the great characters of any war movie, if you think about it. Just how he's competent, he's brave, he's loyal, he's firm, he's smart. Like, he's just the kind of person obviously you want in a war, but also the kind of person who hates being in war, but he's going to do his job and do it well.
Right. But going back to so, you know, the way then that this lieutenant is acting when he's going around and he's asking the guys if they want blindfolds, and when he gets to Corporal Paris, who he is directly responsible for being tied to that post, getting ready to get shot, he can't even look him in the eye. Mm-hmm. He's just, you know, he's looking down. He's like, hey, you know, do you want a blindfold? And the guy's like, no. And he's like, I'm really sorry. And the guy just doesn't say anything to him. And he's like, you know, hangs his head and kind of walks away. Mm-hmm. And oh man.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's powerful. And of course, speaking of powerful, and so again, I kind of even had in my notes here too that if they made a movie about something like this today, you feel like they'd come in with the last minute reprieve and the guys would be saved and justice would be served. And it's like, no, this is Stanley Kubrick. This is more real. And the men are not saved. The men are killed. And kind of the denouement at the end, well, I guess that's always where denouements are, but they're kind of on leave and they go to like a bar and they're just kind of getting a break from the front. And they have this captured German girl that they drag out onto the stage and make her sing for all these French troops that are hooting and hollering at the, you know, the beautiful young German girl who, you know, doesn't even understand the word they're saying. And there's being, you know, almost like the cartoon wolves just howling at this girl. And you feel so bad for her and so disgusted at them. And she starts singing and they slowly shift from hooting and hollering and just kind of lustful to listening to her song. And even though they don't know the language, they start to kind of hum along and sing along, and they all start just like weeping. And it's just this great moment. And honestly, one of the all-time powerful moments of any movie is just kind of that crowd, and they kind of are just singing and chanting with her. And it's just this powerful moment, and they basically stopped objectifying her and just kind of are sitting there in their common humanity with their enemy or someone who represents the enemy. And then we cut to the street outside, and they're kind of told that, yep, these guys are going back to the front tomorrow. Well, just give them a few more minutes. And then it just kind of the military music kicks back in, and, you know, it's all just going to continue as it was before. But you kind of got that one little reprieve right before, which you kind of get the chills just talking about it. It's powerful.
And that German girl is that's Stanley Kubrick's wife.
Which it became Stanley Kubrick's wife.
Right. They weren't married at the time, but because I think in the movie she's credited as Suzanne Christian. But if you watch it on Amazon like I did, and they have, you know, it'll show like trivia stuff about the scene, but she's listed there as Christiane Kubrick, and I was like, what is that, like his sister or something? Right. But yeah, no, he married her.
And yeah, basically they met on this movie and then were married for the next 40 years until he died.
Yeah, which is crazy. So one other thing that I have written here that I thought that this movie did really, really well was kind of juxtaposing the life of your everyman in the trench versus the life of the officers. And it's obviously, you know, visually done by showing these, you know, the dirt and the mud and the dead bodies in the trenches, you know, with the barbed wire and the explosions, versus the mansions and nice furniture and galas and dances and stuff that the officers have, but also just their attitudes towards the war are completely different, and the officers are so out of touch with how they don't really even like see, or if they do see, they're kind of choosing not to acknowledge the effect that the war is having on these guys. Like at the beginning of the movie, one of the generals is going through the trench, shaking everyone's hand, good job, soldier, you're fighting for your country. And this one guy's kind of out of it. One of the guys standing next to him is like, hey, sir, this guy's a little bit shell shocked, don't mind him. And the guy's like, nonsense, no such thing as shell shock. Yeah. And then he, just starts screaming at this guy, basically.
Yeah, I was saying, slapping him around a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, again, when they're planning the attack on the anthill, and the general's talking to Colonel Dax, because he asked how much, what are they forecasting as far as losses? And he says, 5% from friendly fire. Like that's, right off the bat. 5% that we're gonna probably kill, and then he's like, and so many percent getting to the trenches, and so many percent then taking the anthill, and if you add it all up, it's 55% losses is what they forecast. But that's like an acceptable cost to them, that they're gonna send 55% of this regiment to the grave to get this anthill, which it's just it's insane. And then stuff like when they have their lunch and they're haggling over how many of their own guys they're going to execute, and as soon as they're done, he says, oh yeah, 3, that's reasonable. And then the guy just kind of, he turns to Colonel Dax and he's like, well, Colonel Dax, I hope you can stay for lunch. And it's like, yeah, now that we're done talking about your soldiers that we're going to murder by firing squad, on to more pressing business like what we're having for lunch today.
Yeah, just that disconnect, like you said.
And one more example of this, not to beat a dead horse, but at the end, when the firing squad actually shoots the 3 guys, there's no like camera lingering on them as they, die and sad and somber music. It's firing squad, the dudes fall over, and immediately cuts to the 2 generals having lunch together, talking about, the men, they died wonderfully. What a great event this was. We really did a good job, like patting themselves on the back for how well the execution went.
So I wanted to talk about this kind of practice in general. So it is something that, obviously this movie is based on a specific incident, but this was done by both the French and the British, at least on a fairly regular basis. It doesn't look like the U.S. practiced it as much. It may have actually initially had some people who it did condemn, but then their sentences were commuted. But so there's actually a monument in Britain to kind of people who were executed in this way, because I read an article, actually I pulled that up too. So there's an article that talked about, this is obviously a pretty prevalent phenomenon, because they weren't willing to accept at this time the mental anguish that these men were going through, and how they weren't just cowards, they did actually have things like PTSD. So a lot of the men who were, accused of being cowards or deserters had been mentally screwed up by the war effort already, and were basically broken men who then were executing as cowards when they are anything but. And so there's been a push, obviously in more recent decades, to, even though some of them were exonerated at the time, but to further exonerate them and see them as victims of war who did, fight and serve for their countries. So in Britain specifically, so it's taken a while. So in 1993, they were first looking at, in Britain, to kind of pardoning these men and say they died, kind of for the empire. But it was actually argued against them at the time in 1993 that pardoning them would be an insult to those who did die honorably on the battlefield. So it wasn't until then, 2006, that they finally said, I'm going to read the quote here from the British Defense Secretary, and I think he did a good job of kind of basically stating both sides of it in a way that makes sense. So he said, to second guess the decisions made by the commanders in the field, who are doing their best to apply the rules and standards of the time, we didn't want to second guess them, but that it's better to acknowledge that injustices were clearly done in some cases, even if we cannot say which, and to acknowledge that all of these men were victims of war. And so I thought that was kind of maybe a better way to sum it up and say, yeah, hey, some of them may have been, again, not deserving of execution, but, may have been legitimate cowards, but at the end of the day, everyone was a victim of the war, and we need to recognize that. And like I said, there is actually a memorial up in Staffordshire commemorating people who were It's called the Shot at Dawn Memorial, because that's kind of when a lot of these executions would have taken place. So I thought that was interesting and definitely worth a mention. Kirk Douglas is 102 years old and will be 103 in December. He just keeps on rocking.
Yeah, like, he's so old that I didn't even necessarily, like, know that he died. It was just, like, my logical conclusion that I came to in my head, like, oh, of course Kirk Douglas is dead. Like, what is he, over 100? And then I looked it up and oh, no, that guy's still kicking.
Right, we're talking about a movie from 1957. You know, when he was older than I am.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Oh yeah. I guess he was. Yeah, 1916.
Yeah, crazy. Let's see what else I'm trying to think.
This the first Kubrick movie, right, on the list?
Yeah. So actually, yeah, we did Spartacus.
Oh, that's right. Which also Kirk Douglas, but
yes, and that's one too. I think actually Kirk Douglas brought him in when they kind of replaced the director midstream. So Kubrick doesn't actually have that many movies. Have you looked at Stanley Kubrick's filmography?
I have looked at it before, yes, because there are. I mean, that's like. That's like nothing. He's one of those directors where it's pretty easy to be a completionist of his work because there's not that much.
13 movies. Watch. The guy made 13 movies, and the number of them in like the IMDb top 250. I'm pretty sure last I looked, it's like 8 or 10 of them. Like let's just read them all. So he ended with Eyes Wide Shut, which he actually died before it was complete. And I've only seen it the one time. It's probably one of his weakest movies, if not the weakest movie of his. But then 12 years before that was Full Metal Jacket. Before that, 7 years before that, The Shining. Barry Lyndon, which isn't as well known, but it was the Best Picture nominee.
Barry Lyndon is significant, not necessarily because of the plot or anything, but because he lit the movie entirely with natural light and candles. There were no
artificial lights.
Yeah, no lighting, like light bulbs.
Because they wouldn't have had it then. They wouldn't have had it then, so he didn't want to film it. Yep. Because Kubrick was there. I think he started as a photographer. He's definitely all about that. A Clockwork Orange, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Doctor Strangelove, Lolita, Spartacus, Paths of Glory, The Killing, and then the two I haven't seen are Killer's Kiss and Fear and Desire. And those aren't necessarily rated as well. So in my mind, I almost kind of like just to pretend that it starts with The Killing, and then he only has 11 movies. But The Killing is actually really, really good. So I was actually a year before Paths of Glory, and it's about guys fixing a horse race. And as you can see here at 8.0 on IMDb. Yeah, anyway, great director, innovator. If you haven't seen Paths of Glory, you got to check it out. It's actually on...
If you have Amazon Prime Video, it's free.
Oh, nice. Okay, I have the DVD, but not that the IMDb Top 250 is that solid anymore, but Paths of Glory does rank number 60 all time on that site and is a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I'm guessing that means one or two critics for some reason thought it wasn't that great, and I can't even begin to get my head around what you could possibly say against. Oh my gosh! So the negative review is basically saying it's kind of grim. I'm like, yeah, of course it's grim. What are you talking about? That's the point,
guy.
So yeah, no legitimate criticism against Paths of Glory.
Oh my goodness.
Other than I guess they're speaking English instead of French, you could argue. I mean, it's so the language is off, but yeah, no. An inconclusive point is another negative one. Yeah, anyway, no, I completely call BS on any negative reviews of Paths of Glory. It is amazing. And I would say movie vegetable, but I legitimately enjoy this movie. This is not a tough sit.
Yeah, I think All Quiet on the Western Front is more of a movie vegetable
than
Paths of Glory. I think Paths of Glory is not a fun movie to watch, but it's just a good movie. I mean, it's...
Yeah, and again, it's 27 years newer, so it definitely has... Again, it's 1957, so it doesn't necessarily feel modern, but again, the filmmaking has changed, and I think the more recent a movie is, in a lot of ways, the more easier it is to watch just based on what you're used to. The one last thing worth mentioning here is the conversation that the men have about how you would rather die. And they basically
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about how the most important thing is to have a painless way of death. And they basically say it in a way that's, well, of course I'd rather have a painless death than a painful death. And the guy's like, well, yeah, but don't you see then? That means the whole point isn't that we're scared to die. We're scared to be in pain. And I just thought that was kind of a fascinating conversation. And again, this movie is just kind of awesome.
Yeah, and he's talking about like, oh yeah, so-and-so, he's afraid of gas. But I'm not really that afraid of gas, but I am really afraid of explosives. And the other guy's like, oh yeah, I really hate the explosives too.
Man, so yes, go see Paths of Glory. It's amazing.
And free if you have Amazon Prime.